The county gave Amos Red 72 hours to unlock the old Icehouse. After that, they said, the building would come down. To everyone else in Blue Hollow, it was nothing more than a rotting wooden box beside the new nursing home site. Its cedar boards had turned gray from years of weather. The roof bowed in the middle. The iron hinges were brown with rust, and the weeds around the foundation had grown high enough to brush against a man's knees. At the public meeting, contractor Trent Dobbs pointed at the photograph on the projector screen and laughed. "That thing is a refrigerator for ghosts," he said. A few people chuckled. Amos did not argue. He stood in the aisle wearing his old work shirt, his suspenders, and the same cracked boots he had worn since before the hospital closed. In one hand, he held a rusted iron key. In the other, the county's demolition notice trembled just slightly. "You tear that place down before summer ends," he said. "You'll wish you had listened." The room went quiet for half a second. Then the commissioner signed the order anyway. 3 days later, when the heat wave settled over Blue Hollow like a locked oven, the nursing home's cooling system failed. The backup generators coughed. The hallways turned thick and breathless. And the same people who had laughed at Amos came back to the condemned Icehouse, asking him to open the door. What they found inside was not just cold air. It was the secret his wife had hidden there for 46 years. If stories about forgotten places, old promises, and people the world was too quick to dismiss mean something to you, consider subscribing. Because this story is not only about an old building, it is about the kind of truth that waits quietly until the day someone finally needs it. By 10 o'clock that Tuesday morning, the Blue Hollow Community Hall already felt too warm. The ceiling fans turned slowly above the folding chairs. On the front wall, a projector showed the new county nursing home expansion, widened access road, ambulance lane, garden courtyard, and a neat rectangle labeled Future Parking. Beside it, in red, were 3 words Amos Red could read without his glasses: Demolition Icehouse Structure. He sat in the 3rd row with his hat on his knees. Everyone knew why he was there. They had seen the warning notices taped to the Icehouse door, the orange stakes in the weeds, and Amos pulling those stakes out twice before Clara begged him to stop. Commissioner Marla Vance stood at the podium in a pale blue jacket, speaking like the vote had already happened. "The structure has been condemned," she said. "It is unstable, unsanitary, and directly within the approved expansion zone. Mr. Red has been given multiple opportunities to surrender access voluntarily." Trent Dobbs leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. When Marla said voluntarily, he smirked. Evelyn Porter rose from the front row. "We are trying to build something useful for the elderly people of this county," she said. "More parking, safer access, better emergency flow. I respect Mr. Red's memories, truly. But memories cannot stand in the way of care." Several heads nodded. Clara sat 2 seats away, twisting her purse strap. That morning, she had placed the 3rd notice on his kitchen table. "Grandpa, please," she had whispered. "Just give them the key. We can't fight the county over a shack." A shack. Now Marla looked directly at him. "Mr. Red, this is your final chance to cooperate before enforcement begins. Will you unlock the Icehouse?" The room shifted toward him. That was the worst part. Not the order. Not the fines. The eyes. Neighbors who had eaten at his table. Men whose fathers had bought ice from his truck. Women who had waved to Lila Red when she came home from the old charity hospital in her white shoes. Now they looked at Amos like he had become one more unsafe structure to remove. He stood slowly. His knees hurt. The key in his palm was cold, though the room was warm. "I know what you think it is," he said. Trent gave a short laugh. "We know what it is, Mr. Red. It's a liability. It's older than your liability forms." A few people murmured. Clara closed her eyes. Marla tightened her mouth. "Sentiment does not change code." "No," Amos said, "but ground does." That made Trent laugh out loud. "There it is," Trent said. "The magic cold ground. Mr. Red thinks a rotten icebox is going to save us from July." The laughter came gently at first, then easier once people understood no one important would stop it. Amos looked at the projector. The drawing had erased the slope of the hill, the drainage ditch, the limestone shelf, and the spring line running under Blue Hollow like a vein nobody had mapped in 40 years. To the county, it was empty space. To Amos, it was a machine built from shade, water, stone, and patience. Evelyn folded her hands. "Mr. Red, the residents need a safe facility. They'll need that ice house before this summer is over. The room quieted again. Not with respect, with discomfort. Clara stood halfway. Grandpa. Marla lifted the signed order. If you refuse, the county will proceed with forced entry. Costs will be assessed against your property. Not just the ice house. His house. Lila's kitchen. The back porch where she used to peel peaches into a blue bowl. The bedroom where her nurse's scarf still lay in the top drawer. For 1 second, his fingers loosened around the key. Then, he remembered Lila's last breath against his ear. Not until they need the cold. Then they'll understand the names. Amos put the key back into his pocket. No, he said. The word was not loud. It did not need to be. By noon, the order was signed, and half the town had decided Amos Red was throwing away his home for a building that should have been torn down years ago. He walked alone to the edge of the nursing home lot. The ice house stood beyond the orange fencing, gray and crooked in the white heat. He rested his palm against the swollen door. From somewhere beneath the stone floor came a sound almost too small to hear. Water. Still moving. Still cold. Amos whispered, "Not yet, Lila." And behind the locked door, deep in the wall where no county inspector had looked, the first paper name card waited in the dark. Long before Blue Hollow called the ice house condemned, children used to run beside Amos Red's truck when they heard the bell. It was not a big bell. Just a small brass one bolted above the windshield of a faded blue delivery truck with red ice and coal painted on both doors. But in July, that sound meant something. It meant a block of river ice wrapped in canvas. It meant cold milk, safe meat, sweet tea that did not taste like a warm tin cup, and, for some families, one more day of comfort in a house that held heat like a closed fist. Amos had started riding that truck with his father when he was 12. By 20, he could lift a 50-pound block of ice with tongs, swing it against his shoulder, and carry it up porch steps without leaving more than 2 wet marks on the boards. He knew which homes paid on Friday, which widows paid in tomatoes, which families pretended not to be home because they were ashamed to ask for credit. His father always delivered anyway. Cold don't belong only to people with money, Henry Red used to say. Amos did not know then that those words would follow him farther than any road in the county. The ice house stood on the north edge of town, half buried into the hill where the limestone shelf dipped under Blue Hollow. In winter, men cut ice from Miller Pond and stacked it between layers of sawdust. In summer, the stone floor stayed cool enough to fog your breath if you opened the lower chamber before sunrise. When electric refrigerators came, people said the old place was finished. By the time Amos married Lila Mercer, most of the town had already stopped needing him. Lila still did. She was a nurse at Blue Hollow Charity Hospital, a narrow brick building with green tile hallways, metal beds, and a backward that always smelled faintly of bleach and boiled coffee. She had gentle hands, but she was not soft. Amos learned that on their third date, when a man outside the pharmacy called a poor mother trash for asking about medicine she could not afford, Lila stepped between them and said, "Poverty is not a diagnosis." Amos loved her from that moment with a quiet that scared him. They married in the fall, when the maple leaves turned the road behind the hospital red. For 29 years, their life was simple in the way hard lives are simple. Amos fixed the truck, patched the ice house roof, cut firewood, paid what bills he could. Lila worked double shifts, came home with swollen feet, and washed her white stockings by hand in the sink. They never had much money, but they had rituals. Every evening, Lila put her nurse's scarf over the back of the kitchen chair. Amos set her shoes near the stove when it rained. On Sundays, they ate cornbread with beans and listened to the radio. And every July, when the heat pressed low over Blue Hollow, Lila would stand on the porch and look toward the old ice house with a worry Amos did not yet understand. The summer, everything changed, began with 13 straight days above 100 degrees. The hospital's air units groaned day and night. The waiting room filled with farmhands, infants, elderly people, and men from the sawmill who had worked too long under tin roofs. Ambulances came from 2 counties over, because the larger hospitals were full. Amos remembered the sound more than anything. Fans rattling, bed wheels squeaking, Lila's voice calling for water. At first, he only brought ice. A block for the kitchen, 2 for the fever ward, another for the hallway where old men sat with wet towels on their necks. Then Lila started asking him to come after dark. "Don't ring the bell," she told him the first night. He thought she meant not to wake the patients. So he came quietly. He backed the truck to the service entrance, unloaded ice by the yellow light above the door, and watched Lila sign for deliveries in a small notebook instead of the hospital ledger. Sometimes another nurse met them. Sometimes a young orderly opened the door without speaking. Amos never asked questions. In those days, a husband learned when his wife's silence meant exhaustion and when it meant danger. On the 8th night, Lila asked him to take 2 blocks not to the hospital, but to the Icehouse. That puzzled him. "The Icehouse?" he said. "Why?" She looked toward the dark road. "Because some people need cold where no one is keeping records." He wanted to ask more, but then he saw her face. So he loaded the ice. For 3 weeks, Amos made deliveries that did not appear on any invoice. Some nights to the hospital, some nights to the old Icehouse. Lila came home after dawn with her hair damp at the temples and her hands smelling of rubbing alcohol. Once, he found her sitting at the kitchen table with her scarf still tied around her neck, staring at nothing. "How many?" he asked. She did not answer. That was the first time Amos felt there was a wall inside their marriage. Not a wall of betrayal, something worse. A wall of pain she would not let him touch because touching it might make it real. When the heat finally broke, rain came hard enough to flood the gutters. The town thanked the hospital in the newspaper. The board chairman gave a speech about resilience. Donations came in. A photograph showed doctors standing on the front steps. Lila was not in the picture. Neither were the other night nurses. After that summer, she changed in small ways. She kept a drawer locked. She stopped wearing one of her hospital pins. She wrote letters she never mailed. Sometimes, Amos woke before daylight and found her gone from bed. He would look out the window and see her standing across the yard, facing the Icehouse. He thought guilt had done that to her. He thought there were patients she had failed to save. So he never pressed. Years later, when the charity hospital closed and a private clinic replaced it, Lila brought home one cardboard box from her locker. Inside were her scarf, a cracked thermometer, a metal name badge, and a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "What's that?" Amos asked. "Something that has to stay cold," she said. He almost smiled, thinking she meant medicine, but her eyes did not let him. She took the iron key from its hook beside the pantry and walked to the Icehouse alone. Amos watched from the porch as she unlocked the door and disappeared inside for nearly 20 minutes. When she returned, her face was pale, but lighter somehow, as if she had put a weight down in the only place strong enough to hold it. After that, she made him promise. Not in church, not in front of a lawyer, just at their kitchen table on a winter evening, with the furnace ticking and her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "If anything happens to me," she said, "don't let them tear it down. Lila, nobody wants that old place. One day they will." He tried to laugh it off. "Who's going to need an Icehouse now?" She looked at him for a long time. "Not until they need the cold," she said. "Then they'll understand the names." He asked her what names. She only shook her head. And because he loved her, because he trusted her, and because some questions looked too much like wounds, Amos stopped asking. Lila died 6 years later, on a gray morning in March, with that same unfinished sentence still between them. After the funeral, people told Amos to sell the old property. Clara was young then, barely 15, standing in a black dress too big at the shoulders. Amos looked at the Icehouse from the cemetery road and made the promise again without speaking. For 46 years, he kept the key. But he kept it with the wrong understanding. He believed he was protecting Lila's shame. He did not know he was protecting her courage. And in the bottom drawer of his kitchen cabinet, beneath old receipts and rubber bands, the delivery notebook from that terrible summer still held a list of night trips no hospital had ever paid for. By daylight, the old Icehouse looked worse than it truly was. That was part of the problem. From the nursing home lot, it appeared to be nothing more than a tired square of gray cedar boards leaning into the hill. The roof dipped in the center where rainwater had collected for too many winters. One shutter hung crooked beside a narrow vent. The lock plate was almost black with age. Vines had climbed the back wall and worked their fingers into the seams, making the whole building look as if the earth were slowly pulling it down. To county inspectors, that was all there was to see. Rust, liability, a structure past its use. Their report used flat words Amos hated. Unstable, non-compliant, obsolete, hazardous. The kind of words that turned a place into paperwork before anyone bothered to understand what it had once been built to do. But Amos never looked at the ice house from the parking lot. He looked at it from the ground up. He saw how the north wall pressed into the limestone bank, where the hill shaded it through the hottest part of the day. He saw the low roofline that kept sunlight from striking the stone chamber directly. He saw the upper vents cut narrow, not for decoration, but to let warm air draw upward and out. He saw the lower intake near the creek bed, half hidden under weeds, where cooler air used to move like breath through the chamber. And beneath all of it, he knew, was the spring line. Most people in Blue Hollow had forgotten about that spring. Some never knew it existed. It did not break the surface in a pretty pool. It moved under the hill, through limestone and gravel, cold enough that men once stored milk in crocks near the lower wall when the main ice blocks ran thin. Amos had learned the building the way other boys learned baseball fields. His father had shown him where to stack the sawdust thickest, where to leave a channel for meltwater, which stones sweated first before a storm, which vent to close when the wind came hot from the south. An ice house ain't a box, Henry Red had told him. It's an agreement with the ground. That was what the county did not understand. They thought cold came from machines. Amos knew cold could also come from patience, shade, stone, and water moving where no one had bothered to listen. The afternoon after the meeting, Clara followed him to the fence. She wore work pants and carried a folder of county notices tucked under one arm. She had her grandmother's eyes, though Amos had never told her that often enough. Lila's eyes had always softened before she said hard things. Clara's did the same. "Grandpa," she said, "I'm not here to fight." "Then don't. I'm here because they sent another letter." He did not turn around. The orange fencing fluttered between them and the ice house. Beyond it, Trent Dobbs's crew had left survey paint on the grass, bright lines cutting across the old drainage ditch like scars. Clara held out the paper. "If you don't surrender access, they'll add forced entry costs, and demolition costs, and legal fees if you keep delaying." Amos took the letter but did not read it. He already knew what it said. The county had learned how to repeat itself with larger numbers. Clara's voice lowered. "You could lose the house." That made him look at her, not because he had not thought about it, because he had thought about little else since the meeting. The house with the narrow porch, the kitchen where Lila used to hum while cutting biscuit dough, the bedroom where her scarf still waited in the drawer because Amos had never found the courage to move it. "I know," he said. "Then help me understand." So he unlocked the outer gate. Not the ice house door. Not yet. Just the chain around the fence, enough to let Clara step close to the building for the first time in years. The air changed before she reached the wall. It was small, almost easy to deny. A breath against the skin. Less heat near the stones. Clara paused and looked down at the weeds brushing her boots. "You feel that?" Amos asked. She did not answer at first. Then she said, "It's just shade." No shade this deep at 3 in the afternoon. He knelt slowly by the lower wall. His knees complained, but he ignored them. With his pocket knife, he cut away a curtain of dry grass and revealed a narrow iron grate set low in the stone. It was packed with dirt, leaves, and spiderwebs. But when Amos pulled the debris free, cool air touched his fingers. Clara crouched beside him. For a moment, she forgot the folder in her hand. "What is that?" "Lower intake." "For what?" "For breathing." She looked at him as if he had drifted into poetry, and maybe he had. But then she placed her palm near the grate. Her expression changed. Not belief. Not yet. But the first crack in disbelief. Amos stood and led her around the east side, where the cedar boards had warped away from the stone foundation. He showed her the old meltwater channel, now clogged with mud. He showed her the iron hooks where canvas curtains once hung. He pointed to the high vent under the roof peak. If the lower grate is open and the upper vent draws right, the chamber pulls cool from the ground and pushes heat out. Like a chimney? Like a lung. Clara looked back toward the nursing home construction sign. Its painted letters promised comfort, safety, modern care. Behind it, the new building's metal air units sat in a row, clean and bright, and humming in the heat. Then she looked at the ice house. For the first time, Amos saw her compare them. That should have comforted him. Instead, it frightened him, because Clara had only seen the part of the truth Amos understood. She had not seen the part he was afraid of. Near the rear wall, where the stone met the cedar frame, she brushed dust from a row of shallow marks. "Were these storage numbers?" she asked. Amos leaned closer. There were marks cut into the stone, faint but deliberate. Some were simple lines. Others looked like letters worn nearly smooth. One mark resembled the number 7. Another looked like B12. Farther down, half hidden by lime dust, was a small cross scratched beside what might have been a date. Amos's chest tightened. He had seen them before, years ago, and told himself they were old inventory codes, ice blocks, delivery sections, maybe initials from board workers. Anything but what Lila's last words had made them sound like. Probably storage, he said. Clara studied him. You don't know. No. It was the first honest answer he had given her all week. A truck door slammed behind them. They turned to see Trent Dobbs outside the fence, one hand on his hip, hard hat pushed back on his head. Beside him stood a younger man in clean boots and a white county badge clipped to his shirt pocket. Trent smiled like he had caught a child stealing. "Well," he called, "looks like Mr. Red can open gates after all." Clara stood quickly. "We're not inside the structure." "Not yet," Trent said. "But that's exactly the problem. County needs access. Engineers coming tomorrow morning for final assessment." Amos looked at the young man with the badge. The man nodded politely, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. "Nolan Briggs," he said. "Structural and Environmental Review. Commissioner Vance asked me to document conditions before forced entry." Forced entry. The words landed harder when spoken calmly. Trent tapped the fence post. "Bring the key tomorrow, Amos. Let the professionals look at your magic refrigerator." Amos did not answer. He was looking past Trent, past Nolan, past the new nursing home units humming in the sun. He was looking at the high vent under the Icehouse roof, where a strip of old cloth had shifted in the faint draft. For 1 second, something pale showed behind it. Not stone, not wood. Paper, maybe. Then the cloth fell back into shadow. Clara noticed him staring. "What is it?" she asked. Amos closed his hand around the key in his pocket. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "they're going to laugh harder." He looked at the Icehouse door, swollen and gray, and still holding its breath. "And after that, they may not laugh at all." Nolan Briggs arrived the next morning with a tablet, a laser level, 2 sensor cases, and the kind of clean confidence that made old things look guilty before they were touched. Trent Dobbs came with him. So did Commissioner Marla Vance, Evelyn Porter from the nursing home, and 6 people from town who pretended they had only stopped by to see whether the county would finally get past the Icehouse problem. Clara stood near Amos by the fence, arms folded, face tight with worry. The sun was already high. Heat shimmered above the gravel lot. The new nursing home air units hummed steadily behind them. Metal boxes lined in perfect order against the fresh wall. Beside that clean new building, the Icehouse looked smaller than it had the day before. Older. More fragile. Nolan walked a slow circle around it, tapping readings into his tablet. "Exterior deterioration is significant," he said. "Board separation on the east wall, roof sag, possible mold, unknown foundation integrity." Trent gave Amos a look. "Translation," he said, "it's falling apart." Amos kept his hand on the key in his pocket. Nolan crouched near the lower intake Amos had cleared the day before. He held a small digital meter near the grate, waited 3 seconds, then frowned as if the building had failed an exam. "There is some temperature variation," Nolan said. "But that can happen around shaded stone, underground moisture, trapped air pockets." "It's not trapped," Amos said. "It moves." Nolan looked up politely. "Air movement would need to be documented under controlled conditions. My father documented it with milk cans." A few people laughed, not loudly. "Not yet." Nolan smiled in the careful way. Educated men sometimes smiled when they did not want to appear cruel. "Mr. Red, I respect local history. But a modern care facility cannot depend on folklore cooling. Folklore didn't keep meat from spoiling for 70 years. Trent clapped his hands once. "All right, let's see the miracle." Marla stepped forward. "Mr. Red, you agreed to allow limited exterior demonstration. You are not authorized to enter the structure without county supervision. I don't need to go inside for this." Amos took a folded flour sack from his back pocket. He had cut it into narrow strips before dawn, just as his father used to do when checking drafts in winter. He tied one strip to a length of baling wire and held it near the lower grate. For a moment, nothing happened. The strip hung limp. Trent leaned toward Nolan. "Maybe the ghost refrigerator is off today." This time, the laughter came easier. Clara looked down at the ground. Amos waited. He had learned a long time ago that old systems did not like being rushed. They needed doors opened in order, vents cleared, pressure given somewhere to go. People wanted machines to answer when called. Ground answered, when ready. He moved to the north wall and pulled away more dead vines. Beneath them was a rusted lever connected to a narrow vent shaft. It had not been used in years. Amos wrapped both hands around it and pulled. Nothing. His shoulder tightened. He pulled again. The lever groaned but did not move. Trent laughed under his breath. This is what delaying a public project looks like. Nolan stepped closer. Careful. If that's load, bearing, or connected to a compromised vent, it's a draft plate. It may be fused. It's stubborn. So is the man yanking on it, Trent said. A few people chuckled again. Amos felt heat crawl up his neck, but he kept his eyes on the lever. In his mind, he heard Henry Red's voice. Don't fight the metal. Ask where it wants to turn. He shifted his grip lower, put one boot against the stone, and pulled sideways instead of out. The lever screamed, then moved half an inch. A breath of cool air slipped through the grate. The flour sack strip lifted. Not much, just enough, but Clara saw it. So did Nolan. The strip trembled, then bent inward toward the opening, as if the icehouse had drawn a small breath through the earth. For the first time that morning, Trent stopped smiling. Amos moved the wire closer. The strip pulled harder. There, Amos said quietly. Nolan knelt and brought his meter to the grate again. He watched the screen. His expression changed, not into belief, but into irritation at data that had become less simple. Temperature drop is present, he said. Airflow is measurable. Marla's eyes narrowed. Meaning? Meaning there is cool air moving through the lower intake. Trent threw up one hand. It's a hole in the ground. Holes get cool. Amos looked at him. Then why did you want to pave over this one so fast? The small crowd murmured. For a few seconds, the old icehouse seemed to stand taller. Then the vent plate snapped. The lever broke loose with a sharp crack. Amos stumbled backward, and Nolan caught his arm before he fell. Inside the wall, something shifted. A dull wooden thud sounded above them. Then a section of rotted shutter dropped from the high vent and hit the weeds below, sending dust, old cedar flakes, and a dry smell into the air. Clara gasped. Evelyn Porter stepped back. That could have hit someone. Trent pointed immediately. There. That right there is the liability. Nolan released Amos's arm and looked up at the damaged vent. His professional face returned quickly. The structure is actively deteriorating, he said. But the airflow, Clara began, does not change the safety issue, Nolan said. Marla seized on that. So your recommendation remains demolition? Nolan hesitated. Only a second. But Amos saw it. Trent saw it too. Nolan, Trent said, voice lower. Nolan looked at the icehouse, then at the people waiting for an answer. My recommendation, he said carefully, is that no person should enter without stabilization. The county should proceed with controlled access and removal. Removal, not study, not repair. Removal. The word turned the small sign of cold into nothing. Trent's smile came back. Well, Mr. Red, he said, loud enough for everyone, your magic box breathed once and then started shedding parts. That's about as good an argument for demolition as I've ever seen. The laughter was sharper now because relief was in it. People liked the world better when old men were wrong and paperwork was right. It meant they did not have to rethink anything. Clara touched Amos's sleeve. Grandpa, please, you proved something. Maybe that's enough. Let them document it and walk away. He looked at her, and for the first time she looked more frightened than embarrassed. That hurt worse than Trent's joke. Marla folded the county order against her clipboard. Forced access will proceed tomorrow at 8. If the key is not surrendered, the lock will be cut. Amos said nothing, because while everyone had been watching the broken shutter, he had seen what fell behind it. Not all the way. Just a corner. A dark piece of oilcloth tucked inside the vent cavity, wedged behind the inner stone like someone had placed it there by hand and sealed it away from heat, weather, and time. On the edge of the oilcloth was a thread. White. The same kind Lila used to tie her nursing bundles. Amos's mouth went dry. He stepped toward it, but Trent moved between him and the wall. County property line now, Trent said. Don't make this worse. Amos looked past him at the strip of oilcloth. 46 years collapsed into one small corner of cloth. Lila's locked drawer. Her midnight trips. Her unfinished sentence. Then they'll understand the names. Clara followed his gaze, but from where she stood, she could not see what he saw. "What is it?" she whispered. Amos closed his hand around the rusted key until the teeth bit into his palm. "Something your grandmother left where the heat couldn't touch it." Trent rolled his eyes. "Here we go." But Amos was no longer listening to him. The demonstration had failed in front of everyone. By morning, the county would cut the lock. The icehouse would be opened, not with care, but with crowbars, helmets, dust masks, and men paid by the hour to remove what they did not understand. Amos turned away from the fence. Behind him, the torn flour sack strip still moved faintly at the grate, pulling inward with each hidden breath of cold air. And before the next sunrise, he would have to decide whether to keep waiting for permission or open the icehouse himself. That decision would lead him to the first sign that Lila had been right all along. By sunset, the heat had stopped feeling like weather and started feeling like a warning. It pressed against windows. It rose from the pavement. It sat inside parked cars and under porch roofs, and between the rows of fresh brick at the new nursing home like something alive and patient. The radio called it a dangerous heat advisory. By 8 o'clock, Blue Hollow called it worse. The first complaint came from the east wing of the nursing home, where the air felt warmer than the thermostat claimed. Then one of the hallway units began clicking in short, uneven bursts. A maintenance man reset the panel twice. The screen cleared, blinked, and returned with the same error code. Evelyn Porter told her staff not to panic. "Systems fluctuate in extreme heat," she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. In room 14, an old man named Mr. Hanley asked why the wall vent was blowing warm air. In the sitting area, 3 residents sat with paper cups of water in their hands, fanning themselves with activity calendars. A nurse rolled a cart of damp towels down the hall and tried to make it look routine. Across the lot, behind orange fencing, the icehouse stood dark. At 11:30, Clara found Amos in his kitchen. The house was dim, except for the lamp over the sink. The old delivery notebook lay open on the table. Beside it were Lila's scarf, the iron key, and a flashlight with fresh batteries. Clara stopped in the doorway. "You're going over there." Amos did not pretend otherwise. "They'll cut the lock in the morning. That doesn't mean you should go in tonight. If they open it their way, they'll break whatever she left." Clara came closer, lowering her voice as if the county might be listening through the walls. "Grandpa, if they catch you inside, they'll say you tampered with evidence, or trespassed, or something worse. It's my key. It's not your fence anymore." That was true enough to sting. Amos closed the notebook slowly. On one page, under dates from 46 years ago, his younger handwriting listed night deliveries that had never made sense until recently. 2 blocks, service door. 1 block east ward. 3 blocks icehouse. No charge. No signature. He tapped the final line with one finger. "Your grandmother put something in that wall," he said. "I saw the cloth." Clara's anger flickered. "What kind of something?" "I don't know." "Then let the engineer see it." Amos looked at her. That engineer watched the vent breathe and still called it removal. For a while, Clara said nothing. Then the nursing home alarm sounded across the lot. Not a siren, just a thin, repeating tone from somewhere near the service entrance. A staff member hurried outside, spoke into a radio, and disappeared again. Through the kitchen window, Clara and Amos could see 2 nurses pushing a wheelchair away from a bright hallway into the shaded garden courtyard. Clara's face changed. Amos picked up the key. This time, she did not stop him. They crossed the grass without speaking. The night air was still hot enough to make Clara's shirt cling to her back. Insects clicked in the weeds. The new nursing home hummed and shuddered behind them, its machines working too hard and giving too little. Every few seconds, one of the air units made a strained metallic rattle, like a tired animal trying to breathe. At the fence, Amos opened the chain. At the door, he paused. For 46 years, he had kept that key without turning it. His hand shook now, not from age alone, from fear that Lila's secret would accuse him of waiting too long. The lock resisted at first. Then it gave with a deep iron cough. When Amos pulled the door open, the smell came out first. Cheddar, stone, old sawdust, and underneath it, clean cold. Clara drew one sharp breath. "Oh," she whispered. The air inside was not freezing. It was not magic. It was simply, impossibly cooler than the night outside. It touched their faces and hands, moved past them through the open door, and slid down the steps like water. Amos shone the flashlight across the entry room. The upper floor held broken crates, warped boards, a rusted ice hook hanging from a peg. Dust lay thick over everything except the center aisle, where the floorboards had bowed but not collapsed. In the back wall, above shoulder height, the fallen shutter had left a jagged opening into the vent cavity. There it was, the corner of oilcloth. Clara saw it now. She put one hand over her mouth. "Is that what you saw?" Amos nodded. He dragged an old crate beneath the vent and climbed carefully. Clara held his arm as he reached into the cavity. The oilcloth did not come free at first. Something inside the wall held it tight. He pulled gently, then stopped, afraid of tearing it. "Knife," he said. Clara handed him her pocket knife. He cut a thread. White thread. So old, it broke almost before the blade touched it. The bundle slid loose into his hand. It was smaller than he expected. Not a box, not a packet of money, not blueprints. Just folded oilcloth, stiff with age, tied around something flat. Amos stepped down. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the nursing home alarm stopped. The silence after it made the room feel colder. Amos unfolded the oilcloth on top of a crate. Inside was a card, yellowed, no bigger than a church offering envelope, written in Lila's careful nurse handwriting. "Mabel Hartbet Safen. July 18. Kept cold, not admitted." Clara read it once. Then again. "Kept cold?" she said. Amos's throat tightened. He knew the name. Not clearly, not like a friend. More like a face from a delivery route long buried under years. A woman with silver hair who lived near the railroad cut. Her son used to leave coins in a coffee tin for ice when he could not be home. She was real, Amos said. Clara looked at him. What does "not admitted" mean? He had no answer that did not frighten him. From outside came another sound, a nurse calling for help. Clara rushed to the door first. Across the lot, 2 staff members were guiding an elderly woman toward a bench under the garden awning. Evelyn Porter stood nearby, phone pressed to her ear, her composed face finally cracked by heat and worry. Amos picked up the card. "Bring that bottle," he said. "What bottle?" He pointed to an old glass water bottle sitting near the lower step, left there years ago, half filled from condensation, and sealed with a rubber stopper. Clara touched it and looked startled. "It's cold. Take it." They crossed back through the fence with the bottle wrapped in Amos's handkerchief. Trent was not there. Marla was not there. No crowd laughed this time. Only nurses, heat, and residents trying to breathe through another hot night. Evelyn saw Amos and stiffened. "You cannot be on that side of the fence." Amos held out the bottle. "Put this against her neck." Evelyn hesitated just long enough for Clara to snap. "Do it." The nurse took it instead. She pressed the cold glass gently beneath the elderly woman's jaw. The woman closed her eyes and let out a small sound of relief. Everyone saw it. Evelyn saw it. Clara saw it. Nolan Briggs, who had just arrived in a county truck, with his shirt untucked and his tablet under one arm, saw it too. He walked over slowly. "Where did that come from?" Amos looked past him toward the icehouse. "From the hole in the ground you measured yesterday." Nolan did not answer. The elderly woman's breathing steadied. The nurse asked for another cold bottle, another towel, anything. For the first time, no one asked whether the icehouse mattered. They only looked toward it. Then Clara, still holding the yellowed card, stepped into the glow from the nursing home entrance. "Nolan," she said, her voice unsteady. "Do hospital records keep names of people who were treated but never admitted?" Nolan looked at the card. The words on it seemed to pull the night tighter around them. "Mabel Hartbet Safe. Kept cold, not admitted." Nolan's face changed the way it had changed at the grate. Data had become less simple again. He looked toward the nursing home, then toward the icehouse door still hanging open in the dark. "We need to know how many more are in that wall," he said. And behind them, from the lower chamber Amos had not yet opened, a deeper breath of cold air moved through the old building, as if the icehouse had been waiting all these years for someone to ask the right question. That question would open the door to everything Lila had hidden below. By 2 in the afternoon, the nursing home stopped pretending the problem was temporary. The hallway thermostats no longer matched the air. The east wing smelled of warm plastic, damp towels, and fear people were trying to hide. 2 portable fans had already burned out. The backup generator behind the service entrance coughed every few minutes, sending a shudder through the lights. Evelyn Porter stood at the nurse's station with one hand pressed to her forehead. "We can move them to the dining hall," one nurse said. It's hotter there. The chapel? No airflow. The buses? County dispatch says the main road is backed up from the power outage. Ambulance service is prioritizing emergencies. No one said what everyone understood. The building made for elderly care could not keep elderly people cool. Outside, the heat had become white and merciless. The garden courtyard shimmered. The parking lot threw sunlight back into people's faces. Residents sat in wheelchairs along the shaded wall with wet cloths around their necks, while staff moved from person to person, checking pulses, whispering reassurances, trying not to look toward the old icehouse across the fence. Nolan Briggs stood near the service door, tablet in hand, reading numbers he did not like. Ambient in the East Hall is 89 and rising, he said. Evelyn looked at him. How long until repairs? The compressor failure is cascading through the second unit. If the generator dips again, we lose the west wing too. Clara stood beside Amos under the awning, still holding the yellowed name card in a plastic sleeve Nolan had found in his truck. Mabel Hart Betsaven. Kept cold, not admitted. Evelyn had not wanted to look at it. Now she could not stop looking toward the icehouse. Amos said nothing. He had learned, over 80 years, that some people had to arrive at the truth out of breath. Finally, Evelyn crossed the courtyard. Mr. Red, she said, and for the first time her voice had no podium in it. Can that building hold people safely? Trent Dobbs, who had arrived in a county pickup 10 minutes earlier, gave a sharp laugh. You cannot be serious. Evelyn did not look at him. Amos looked toward Nolan. Nolan swallowed. The outer structure is compromised, he said, but the lower stone chamber may be more stable than the upper frame. If we limit entry, clear a path, monitor temperature and air quality, Trent cut in. This is insane. We're talking about moving residents into a condemned ice shed. Amos looked at him. No, he said. We're talking about moving them out of heat. That ended the argument for the nurses. They did not wait for county language to catch up. They gathered wheelchairs, water cups, medications, clipboards, folded blankets. Clara and Nolan helped Amos clear the entry path. Trent cursed under his breath but moved broken boards when Evelyn snapped his name like an order. Amos opened the icehouse door fully. Cold air came out heavier this time. Not a gust. A slow pour. It rolled down the threshold and spread across the weeds, carrying the smell of limestone, cedar, and old water. One nurse stopped in the doorway and closed her eyes for half a second before remembering herself. Inside, Nolan tested the floorboards. Stay to the center, he said. One at a time. Amos led them past the upper storage room to the narrow stair that dropped into the lower chamber. The steps were stone, worn in the middle by generations of boots. Clara shone her flashlight down, expecting darkness and decay. Instead, she saw walls that looked stronger than the building above them. Thick limestone blocks, a gravel drainage bed, iron hooks set into beams blackened by age. A shallow channel along the edge where water still moved, not fast, not loud, but constant. The air below was at least 15 degrees cooler, maybe more. The first resident they brought down was Mr. Hanley from room 14. He had been complaining about the warm vent all morning. Now, as his wheelchair reached the lower landing, he opened his eyes wider and whispered, "Well, I'll be." Another woman laughed softly, not from humor but relief. Within 20 minutes, the lower chamber held 12 residents, 3 nurses, 2 portable oxygen tanks, and a folding table with water cups lined in rows. Nolan set a meter on the stone ledge and watched the readings settle. Temperature, humidity, air movement. For once, the numbers agreed with Amos. Evelyn stood near the stair, stunned by the sight of her residents breathing easier in a building she had wanted removed. Amos did not look proud. He looked tired. He looked, Clara thought, like a man listening for someone who was no longer there. She moved to the back wall with the flashlight, partly to give herself something to do. The stone there was colder than the rest. Near shoulder height, several scratches marked the surface. Some looked like the marks upstairs. B12, W3, a cross, a date. Then she noticed a seam, not a crack, a line too straight to be natural. "Grandpa," she called. Amos turned. Clara brushed dust from the seam. A small rectangle of stone shifted under her fingers. It was not loose enough to fall, but not sealed like the others. Nolan came over quickly. "Don't pry without." But Amos was already beside Clara, staring at the wall. He touched the stone with 2 fingers. "Lila," he whispered. Behind them, Mr. Hanley said, "Who's Lila?" No one answered. Amos reached into his pocket and took out the small screwdriver he had carried since his delivery days. He worked it gently along the seam, not forcing, just asking. The stone cover moved a fraction, then another. Nolan braced it with both hands. Clara held the light steady. The cover came free. Behind it was a cavity wrapped in oilcloth. Not one bundle. Many. For a moment, the chamber seemed to lose every sound except the water moving in the channel. Amos lifted the first bundle out, then the second. Then Clara reached in and found more, stacked flat, tied with white thread that had darkened with age. Evelyn came closer. "What are those?" "Amos untid one." Inside were cards. Dozens of them. Some yellow, some gray at the edges. All written in careful handwriting Amos knew better than his own. Name, bed number, date, temperature. A short phrase. Kept cold, not admitted. Kept cold released. Kept cold died before dawn. Clara stopped reading aloud. Her hand began to shake. Evelyn stepped backward as if the words had heat in them. Nolan took one card carefully and compared it to Mabel Hart's. "These are patient tracking cards." Evelyn shook her head. "If they were patients, they should be in hospital records." Amos looked at the bundles still inside the wall. "They weren't," he said. The words did not sound like accusation yet. They sounded like grief, learning a new language. A nurse near the folding table turned slowly. "Why would someone keep patients here?" Amos looked at the residents sitting in the cool chamber, the living, breathing inside the same stone walls that had hidden the dead and the saved. Then he remembered Lila's face after those night shifts. Her locked drawer, her letters never mailed. The way she had stood outside the icehouse as if asking forgiveness from a door. "I think," he said, "because the hospital wouldn't keep them inside." No one spoke. Even Trent, standing halfway down the stairs with dust on his boots, had no joke ready. Above them, the new nursing home lights flickered once as the generator dipped again. Below, in the old chamber everyone had called obsolete, the residents remained cool. Nolan stared at the bundles. "How many?" Clara looked into the wall cavity. Her flashlight caught more oilcloth deeper inside. "I don't know," she said. "A lot." Evelyn's voice came out thin. "This has to be documented properly." Amos looked at her then. For the first time, he saw fear in her face that was not about heat, budgets, or construction delays. It was about names. Names that did not belong to the county. Names that did not belong to a hospital board. Names that had waited 46 years in the cold because the living had not been ready to carry them. Amos placed one card on the stone ledge. Mabel Hart Betsave. Then another. Isaiah Cole W3. Then a third. Ruth Ann Fields no chart. Clara covered her mouth. "No chart," she whispered. That was the moment the icehouse changed. Not only for Amos, for everyone. It was no longer a condemned structure that happened to be useful in a heat wave. It was no longer an old man's stubborn shrine. It was a place where the town's forgotten people had been kept alive, hidden, or lost outside the story Blue Hollow had been telling about itself. And as the first residents breathed easier in the cool lower chamber, Amos understood that opening the door had only proved the smallest part of what Lila had left behind. The deeper truth was still in the wall. And once the heat broke, the people who wanted the icehouse gone would try much harder to control what those names meant. That fight would begin in the next part. The heat broke just before dawn, but nothing in Blue Hollow felt relieved. A thin rain came down over the nursing home roof, hissing against pavement that had stayed hot all night. Residents were moved carefully back from the icehouse lower chamber to their rooms. Nurses thanked Amos in quiet voices. "Mr." Hanley squeezed his hand and said, "Old places remember things, don't they?" Amos did not know how to answer. By 7 o'clock, the icehouse door was closed again, but not locked the way it had been before. Nolan had placed a temporary county seal over it. Yellow tape circled the entrance. Marla Vance stood near the fence, speaking into her phone in a low, sharp voice. Trent Dobbs paced beside his truck, angry because the demolition crew had been told to wait. Only wait, not cancel. That difference mattered. At 8:30, Marla gathered Amos, Clara, Nolan, Evelyn, and Trent under the awning beside the nursing home entrance. "We need to be very careful," she said. "What happened last night was an emergency response under unusual conditions. It does not change the fact that the structure is unsafe." Clara stared at her. People cooled down in there because my grandfather was right. Marla's eyes flicked toward her. Your grandfather may have identified a useful environmental feature. That is not the same thing as making the structure legally occupiable. Useful environmental feature, Amos repeated. The words sounded almost funny. Almost. Evelyn Porter stood with her arms folded, her face pale from a night without sleep. She did not look at Amos directly. We also have to consider patient privacy, she said. Clara turned. Those people were hidden in a wall for 46 years, and we do not yet know who they were, what their medical status was, or whether any protected records are involved. They had names. Evelyn's voice tightened. And names must be handled properly. That was the first sign Amos saw of how the truth could be buried a second time. Not with shovels this time, with policies, committees, proper channels, temporary custody, review. Nolan cleared his throat. I photographed the first layer of cards in place, he said. No one should move the rest until we have archival support. Trent laughed. Archival support? It's a bunch of old paper in a rotten wall. Nolan looked at Mo. Old paper that may relate to undocumented patient care. Trent's smile faded. Careful what you call it. Marla stepped between them. Exactly. We are not assigning meaning before review. But Amos heard the fear underneath. Meaning was the thing they were most afraid of. Later that morning, Clara drove to the county records office, while Nolan requested access to the old hospital archives stored in the courthouse basement. Amos went with them, though Clara told him twice he should rest. He sat in the back seat with Lila's scarf folded in his hands and watched rain streak the windows. The records office smelled of cardboard, toner, and old carpet. A clerk led them to 3 metal cabinets, labeled Blue Hollow Charity Hospital closed files. Inside were board minutes, donation ledgers, construction permits, annual reports, and photographs of men in suits standing beside oversized checks. But when Clara searched for Mabel Hart, there was nothing. No admission, no discharge, no death record tied to the hospital. Isaiah Cole was not there either. Ruth Ann Fields had a county burial note, but no chart. Nolan grew quieter with each missing name. Maybe they were treated off-site, Clara said. The clerk glanced toward the door. If they were treated by the hospital, there should be something. Unless someone removed it, Amos said. No one answered. They found one board memo from that summer, dated July 21, 46 years earlier. It mentioned unregistered walk-ins, creating strain on resources, and the need to protect institutional stability during adverse weather conditions. Institutional stability. Amos read the phrase twice. He thought of Lila coming home with damp hair and shaking hands. He thought of people sitting in the cold lower chamber while the hospital kept its records clean. By the time they returned to the Icehouse, a black sedan was parked near the fence. The man beside it wore a tan raincoat and polished shoes that did not belong in the mud. He was in his 60s, with silver hair combed flat and leather gloves folded in one hand. He introduced himself as Martin Vale. I collect medical history from rural institutions, he said. Amos looked at the sedan. You drove fast, Martin smiled. News travels faster when people are careless with photographs. Nolan stiffened. Those images were for documentation only. Of course, Martin said. And documentation has a way of becoming public before anyone understands its value. Clara stepped closer to Amos. Martin opened a slim folder. Inside were photographs of old hospital equipment, nurse ledgers, charity ward signs, and framed name tags. I'm prepared to make a private offer, he said. For the paper material only, not the building, not the land, just the cards, notes, cloth bundles, and any related items. Amos said nothing. Martin named a figure. Clara inhaled sharply. It was enough to pay every county fine. Enough to repair Amos's roof. Enough to hire a lawyer. Enough, maybe, to keep the house no matter what Marla did next. Martin saw the number land. You are an elderly man being pressured by a county government, he said softly. I can preserve these items properly. Climate-controlled storage. Professional cataloging. No media circus. No legal burden placed on your family. Clara's hand tightened around the folder she carried. What about the families? She asked. Martin looked at her with polite sadness. Miss Red, after 46 years, many families may prefer not to have old pain reopened. Amos finally looked at him. Did they tell you that? Martin's smile faded a little. I'm offering protection. No, Amos said. You're offering quiet. The rain tapped against the icehouse roof. Behind the sealed door, the cards waited in the cold. Martin lowered his voice. Mr. Red, once this becomes public, you lose control. County attorneys will take custody. Hospital trustees will deny wrongdoing. Reporters will simplify it. Families will fight. Your wife's name may be dragged through something ugly. A private collection can keep her work respected. That struck where he meant it to. Lila's name. For one moment, Amos saw the future Martin described. Lila accused of hiding patients. Lila called reckless. Lila's careful handwriting passed around by strangers who never heard her voice or saw how she washed blood from her sleeves in the kitchen sink. He could take the money. He could protect the house. He could protect her name from noise. But then, Mabel Hart would remain a card. Isaiah Cole would remain a missing file. Ruth Ann Fields would remain no chart, and the Icehouse would have kept them cold for nothing. Marla arrived before Amos answered. Her face changed when she saw Martin. Who authorized you to be here? Martin slipped the folder closed. No one authorizes interest in history, Commissioner. Trent leaned near Marla and muttered. This is exactly why we need county control. Nolan looked from Martin to Marla, then to the sealed icehouse door. For the first time, Amos saw the young engineer understand that danger did not only come from rotten boards. Sometimes it came from people who wanted to preserve a thing so completely that no one living could ever touch it again. Amos handed Martin's folder back. My wife didn't hide those names so a stranger could buy them. Martin's eyes cooled. Then you should prepare for what happens when everyone else tries to claim them. He stepped into his sedan and drove away without splashing mud, as if even the road had made room for him. Clara turned to Amos. Grandpa, if county takes custody, they'll sort it. You don't believe that? No, he did not. Across the lot, Evelyn Porter watched from the nursing home doors, torn between gratitude, fear, and the weight of a history that could break the institution she was trying to build. Marla was already on her phone again. Trent was measuring the fence with his eyes. Nolan stood in the rain, tablet forgotten under his arm, and Amos understood that the heat wave had only opened the door. Now came the harder thing. They would have to open the wall, not for cold, for truth. And what they found there would not only change what people thought of the hospital, it would change what Amos thought he knew about Lila. They opened the wall the next morning with more care than the county had ever given the building. Nolan brought gloves, evidence bags, a camera, and 2 battery lamps. Clara brought plastic sleeves from the library and a notebook with numbered pages. Amos brought nothing but the key and Lila's scarf folded inside his coat pocket. Marla Vance insisted on being present. So did Evelyn Porter. Trent Dobbs stood outside the icehouse door, angry that no one needed him to swing a hammer. The lower chamber was cool and dim, the kind of cool that made voices smaller. Water moved through the channel along the edge of the floor. Every few seconds, a drop fell somewhere behind the stone and echoed like a clock. Nolan photographed the seam before touching it. Once we remove these, he said, we log them in order. No one pockets anything. No one separates a card from its bundle. Marla nodded. County custody will... No, Amos said. The word was quiet, but it stopped her. These names don't belong to the county. Marla's face hardened. Mr. Red, this is not the time for... It's exactly the time. Clara stepped beside him. We can document chain of custody without handing them to the same system that erased them. Nolan looked at Marla, then at the wall. We document first, he said. Custody can be argued after. It was the first time he had openly chosen delay over obedience. Amos noticed. So did Marla. They began with the bundles closest to the opening. Each was wrapped in oilcloth, tied with white thread, and marked with a small number written in pencil. Inside were cards like the first one, but also thin pages torn from nursing pads, strips of temperature logs, and small scraps of cloth with initials sewn into the corner. Lila had not hidden chaos. She had hidden a system. Bundle 1 held names from July 14 and 15. Bundle 2 held July 16. Bundle 3 held July 17 through dawn. By the 5th bundle, Clara had stopped trying to hide her tears. Grandpa, she said, there are so many. Amos looked at the rows of cards laid carefully on the stone ledge. 43 so far. And the wall still held more. Some names had notes beside them. Cooled 2 hours sent home. No bed kept until morning. Child, with fever mother, refused entry. Old man from Mill Road no chart. Then came a small ledger, wrapped separately. Nolan opened it with both hands. On the first page was Lila's handwriting. Unofficial cooling list. Not hospital property. Names kept because someone should know. Evelyn sat down on an overturned crate, as if her knees had weakened. "That can't be real," she whispered. Amos looked at her. "Why?" She did not answer. Maybe because real meant the old hospital had lied. Maybe because the new nursing home stood on the moral shadow of that lie. Clara turned the next page. There were columns: name, age if known, who brought them, temperature, time received, time released or lost, witness nurse. Witness nurse. Not doctor. Not administrator. Nurse. Lila had not been alone. There were other signatures too. Mary Haskins. June Bell. Ruth Calder. A name Amos remembered from church. Another from the grocery counter. Women who had spent the rest of their lives being called kind, dependable, ordinary. He had never known they had carried this. At the back of the ledger, tucked behind the final page, was an envelope. The paper had browned at the edges, but Lila's handwriting was clear. Amos. His hand shook when Clara gave it to him. For a moment, he could not open it. He had wanted her voice for 46 years. Now that it was in his hand, he was afraid of what it might ask of him. Clara touched his arm. "You don't have to read it out loud." But Amos knew he did. Not for Marla. Not for Evelyn. Not for Nolan. For the names. He unfolded the letter. "My Amos, if you are reading this, then either I waited too long, or the town finally needed the cold again. I am sorry for both. You always thought the worst part of that summer was the people we could not save. I let you think that because it was easier than telling you the truth. The worst part was not that people died. The worst part was that some were never allowed to exist on paper at all. The board told us there were no beds for unregistered walk-ins. That is what they called them. Not neighbors. Not mothers. Not millmen. Not children with fever. Walk-ins. They said the hospital could not risk its funding, its mortality numbers, or its reputation by admitting people who could not pay or could not be transferred properly. So they were left in hallways, porches, wagons, and cars. A few of us could not bear it. We used your ice. We used the old chamber. We used wet sheets, river bottles, and the cold wall. We brought them down after dark when we could. Some lived because of that place. Some died cooler than they would have died outside. That is not enough, but it is not nothing. I wrote every name I could. Not to accuse the dead. Not to protect myself. To keep them from disappearing. If I gave these records to the hospital then, the board would have destroyed them and blamed the nurses. If I gave them to the families without proof, they would have called it grief, rumor, or revenge. So I hid them where the cold had already done what mercy could. I asked you to guard the Icehouse because I trusted you more than I trusted the world. But Amos, listen to me now. Do not guard it forever. When they need the cold, open the door. When they see the names, let them go home." He stopped reading. The last line blurred. Clara finished it for him, voice breaking. "And forgive me for letting you think I was ashamed. I was afraid. There is a difference." No one moved. The water kept running. Amos folded the letter against his chest and closed his eyes. For nearly half a century, he had treated Lila's silence like a wound she could not bear to show him. He had protected the Icehouse as if it held her failure. He had imagined her standing in the dark, haunted by the people she could not save. But Lila had not hidden failure. She had hidden testimony. She had built a witness out of paper, cloth, cold air, and time. Evelyn Porter covered her mouth with one hand. "My grandmother," she said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. She swallowed. Her name was Ruth Ann Fields. Clara looked down at the cards. Ruth Ann Fields, no chart. Evelyn's face drained of color. "My mother always said she died at home. She said no one came. She said the hospital was full." Amos looked at the card again. The note under Ruth Ann's name was small. "Kept cold held, until dawn breathing when taken." Evelyn reached for the stone wall to steady herself. She was alive? Nolan read the ledger entry beside the card. Transferred by county vehicle at 5:10 a.m., no receiving chart attached. That was consequence number 1. A family had been told a woman died abandoned, when she may have been moved alive into a system that left no paper behind. Consequence number 2 came when Clara found a list of 3 survivors marked "Follow Up Denied." Their families had never received charity care credits, medicine assistance, or transportation support because Officially, they had never been admitted. Consequence number 3 appeared in the board memo folded inside Lila's ledger. The same summer, the hospital reported no preventable losses among registered charity patients. It received a donor grant for administrative excellence. Registered charity patients. The word registered did all the hiding. Marla Vance sat very still. Amos saw her understand what it meant for the county, for the nursing home project, for the donor plaques, for every clean speech ever given about Blue Hollow Charity Hospital. Trent, from the stairwell, muttered, "This is old history." Amos turned toward him. "No," he said. "Old history is what you tell after the people in it are safe. This is unfinished." Nolan closed the ledger gently. "We need independent archivists," he said, "and legal counsel for the families." Marla looked at him sharply. "Nolan." He did not look away. "Commissioner, if we don't document this outside county control, anything we do next will look like another cover-up." Another. The word hung there. Evelyn began to cry then, quietly, not for reputation or funding, but for a grandmother who had apparently lived long enough to vanish into paperwork. Clara placed the Ruth Ann Fields card in a sleeve and set it apart, not as evidence first, but as something that had finally found a descendant. Amos looked at Lila's letter again. "When they see the names, let them go home." For 46 years, he had believed his task was to keep the door locked. Now he understood. The promise had never been about keeping the Icehouse closed. It had been about keeping it standing long enough to open it at the right time. He put Lila's scarf on the stone ledge beside the cards. Then he looked at Marla, Evelyn, Nolan, Clara, and even Trent. "No one buys them," he said. "No one boxes them away where families can't reach them. No one calls this a misunderstanding." Marla's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, because the room was full of names now, and names have a way of making silence look guilty. Above them, rainwater ran from the broken roof into the weeds. Below them, the spring kept moving through the limestone, cold and patient. The truth had survived the heat. Now the town would have to decide whether it could survive the truth. That reckoning would begin when the first families came to the Icehouse. The first family came before noon. Not reporters, not lawyers, not county staff, just a woman named Denise Hartwell, 68 years old, wearing a raincoat buttoned wrong and holding a folded newspaper clipping so old, the crease had nearly split the photograph in half. Clara met her at the Icehouse fence, while Amos stood by the door with the key in his hand. "My mother was Mabel Hart," Denise said. No one corrected her. No one asked for proof first. Clara simply opened the notebook and showed her the protected sleeve. "Mabel Hart Betseva, July 18. Kept cold, not admitted." Denise did not cry right away. She stared at the card as if her eyes had to learn how to read a new version of her own childhood. "They told us she never made it past the hospital porch," she whispered. "My brother blamed himself because he was the one who drove her there." Amos lowered his head. The apology in his chest was too large for words that would help. Denise touched the plastic sleeve with 2 fingers. "So someone did take her in?" Clara looked at Amos. Amos answered carefully. "Someone brought her here. Someone tried to keep her cool. Your mother was not left alone." That was when Denise broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. She just folded over the card and made a sound so small everyone near the fence looked away to give her privacy. By mid-afternoon, 2 more families had come. Then 5. Nolan set up a temporary table under a canopy and logged every viewing. Clara wrote names, contact numbers, relationships, and questions. No original card left the Icehouse, but every family was given a photograph, a transcript, and the promise that independent archivists would verify the records. That word, independent, became the line Amos would not let anyone cross. Evelyn Porter returned near evening. She had changed out of her administrative blazer into a plain gray cardigan. In her hands was a folder from the nursing home office. Her face looked older than it had 2 days earlier. "I found the donor history files," she said. Marla, who had been standing near the county truck, turned sharply. "Evain." But Evelyn kept walking toward Amos. "My grandmother's name was not in the hospital archive," she said. "But the foundation that helped fund our new wing used Blue Hollow Charity Hospital's clean emergency record in 3 separate grant applications." She opened the folder. Inside were photocopies, board statements, old fundraising brochures, and a photograph of the hospital chairman smiling beside a plaque. "We cannot keep building care on top of that sentence," Evelyn said. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. I spoke with my board. I am requesting a pause on the parking expansion and a full external review of the hospital legacy files. And I am opening the nursing home dining hall tomorrow for families who need help reading the records. Marla's mouth tightened. That decision should have gone through county coordination. Evelyn looked at her. My grandmother went through county coordination, she said. Apparently she disappeared there. No one spoke for several seconds. It was not a clean apology. Not yet. Evelyn still looked frightened. She still had a facility to run, residents to protect, donors to answer to, but for the first time, she had chosen the people on the cards over the institution that had hidden them. That mattered. Marla took longer. All afternoon, she moved between phone calls, legal cautions, and phrases like jurisdiction, exposure, liability, preliminary review. She did not mock Amos anymore, but she also did not say she was sorry. Near sunset, after Nolan sent her the temperature data from the lower chamber and Clara handed her a list of 17 families already connected to the cards, Marla finally stood before the small crowd at the fence. The demolition order, she said, is suspended pending structural stabilization, archival review, and public safety assessment. Trent Dobbs swore under his breath. A few people clapped. Amos did not. Marla looked at him only briefly. Mr. Red, she added, the county should have performed a more complete review before proceeding. It was not enough. Everyone knew it. But it was the first official sentence that did not call the Icehouse obsolete. Clara found Amos beside the lower intake after the families had gone. He was clearing leaves from the grate with his pocket knife, as if the building still needed ordinary care after all that had happened. Grandpa, she said. He kept working. I'm sorry. The knife stopped. She swallowed hard. I thought you were choosing a building over your home. Over me. I thought Grandma Lila's memory had trapped you there. Amos looked toward the Icehouse door. So did I, in a way. Clara frowned. I thought I was guarding her hurt, he said. Turns out she was guarding other people's names. Clara wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I should have believed you. No, Amos said. You should have asked, and I should have answered more than I did. That was the first honest peace between them. Not perfect, not finished, but real. Later, Martinvale's black sedan returned. This time, he did not step past the fence. He stood in the road, saw the families gathered under the canopy, saw Nolan photographing cards, saw Evelyn handing coffee to Denise Hartwell, and understood that the thing he wanted was already becoming impossible to own. He offered one final number anyway, higher than before, high enough that Clara turned pale. Amos listened until Martin finished. Then he said, you can buy paper. You can buy cabinets. You can buy rooms where nobody gets to touch what hurt them. But you can't buy somebody's mother back into silence. Martin closed his folder. You'll regret refusing protection. Amos looked at the families. No, he said. I regret needing 46 years to understand what protection meant. Martin left. This time, his tires threw mud. As evening cooled, the first copied cards were placed in envelopes with family names written across the front. Ruth Ann Fields's card went to Evelyn, not as property, but as kinship. Mabel Hart's went to Denise. Others waited for families not yet found. Amos stood inside the Icehouse doorway, while Clara locked the temporary archive box. Behind them, the lower chamber breathed cold into the dark. For the first time, the names were not hidden from heat, men, or history. They were on their way home. And when the last family left, Amos looked at Clara and said, tomorrow, we figure out how to keep this place useful. That would become Lila's real legacy. By the time September came, the Icehouse was still standing. That alone felt like a miracle to some people in Blue Hollow. The demolition fence was gone. The orange survey paint had faded under rain and sun. Trent Dobbs's machines had been moved to another county project. Though the rectangular scar of the future parking lot remained on the old planning map, crossed out now with a black marker, and the word suspended, written in Marla Vance's careful hand. Not canceled, suspended. Amos understood the difference. The legal review was still open. The hospital foundation had hired attorneys. County council had requested statements. Families were filing petitions for records they should have received decades earlier. Some people in town said it was all too old to matter. Others said old was exactly why it mattered. No one called the Icehouse worthless anymore. They called it by a new name, painted on a modest wooden sign Clara made herself. Blue Hollow Cooling Shelter. No ribbon cutting. No brass plaque. No row of officials smiling for a newspaper photograph. Amos had refused all of that. This place spent long enough being used for people's speeches, he told Clara. Let it be used for people. So they repaired only what needed repairing. Nolan Briggs helped reinforce the upper frame without sealing off the old vents. He installed small temperature sensors in places Amos approved of, and learned quickly that the building did not like being treated like a machine. One afternoon, after 3 failed readings near the lower intake, Amos moved the sensor 6 inches to the left. The numbers settled. Nolan stared at the screen. How did you know? Amos pointed to the limestone under the wall. Stone sweats there first. Nolan looked embarrassed, then smiled. I should write that down. You should learn to see it before you write it down. After that, he did. Clara learned faster than either of them expected. She learned which vent to open when the wind came from the south. She learned how to clear the meltwater channel without disturbing the stone bed. She learned that the lower chamber cooled best when the door was opened slowly, not flung wide. She learned where Lila had hidden the bundles, but also where Henry Red had carved a small mark into the beam to show the old stacking line for winter ice. At first, she wrote everything in a notebook. Then one hot afternoon, Amos saw her pause, touch the wall, and close the upper vent halfway, without checking her notes. He said nothing, but later, alone by the door, he smiled. The name cards did not stay in the Icehouse as a display. That had been Clara's strongest argument, and Amos had agreed before she finished saying it. The originals were preserved by independent archivists, copied for legal review, and then, when verified, returned in ceremony only as quiet as each family wanted. Some families asked for privacy. Some asked for a prayer. Some asked only to sit in the lower chamber for a few minutes and feel the cold their mother, grandfather, aunt, or brother had once felt when the hospital would not write their names down. Denise Hartwell brought her brother to receive Mabel Hart's card. He was an old man himself by then, with a cane and eyes that would not meet anyone's for the first 10 minutes. When he finally touched the copy of his mother's card, he said, "I thought I left her on the porch." Amos answered, "You brought her as far as you could. Someone carried her the rest of the way." The man cried then. Was let him. Evelyn Porter kept Ruth Ann Fields's card in her office for 1 week before sending it to the archivists. Not framed, not displayed, just placed beside a photograph of her mother as a girl. When she came back to the Icehouse, she told Amos that the nursing home board had voted to fund transportation for low-income residents during heat emergencies. "It is not enough," she said. "No," Amos replied, "but it is a start that moves." Marla Vance never gave the apology people wanted from her. Not in full, but she signed the protection order that kept the Icehouse standing through the review. She authorized emergency use. She approved the county alert system that listed the Icehouse as a cooling site during heat advisories. And one evening, when only Amos was there, she stood at the door and said, "I thought progress meant clearing what was in the way." Amos looked at the lower chamber. Sometimes what's in the way is the thing holding everything up. Marla nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was not friendship, but it was one less lie between them. The next summer, the first heat advisory came in June. Not as bad as the one before, but bad enough. By noon, Clara had the shelter open. Nolan checked the sensors. Evelyn sent over 2 aides with water, towels, and a list of residents whose air conditioners had failed. The county dispatch line gave the address without hesitation. Amos sat on a bench outside, hat in his lap, watching people enter. An old woman from the trailer park. A mail carrier with heat rash on his neck. 2 children whose grandmother could not afford to run the window unit all day. Mr. Hanley, who came even though his room was cool, because he said the Icehouse had better conversation. Clara moved through them with cups of water and the calm authority of someone who knew the building would answer if treated properly. Near the stone ledge in the lower chamber, Amos had placed Lila's nurse scarf under a simple glass cover. No plaque, no speech. Just her name written on a card beside it. Lila Red, nurse. She kept the names cold until they could go home. That was the only memorial he allowed. Late in the afternoon, when the shelter settled into a soft murmur, Clara found him by the lower intake. "You should come inside," she said. "It's cooler." Amos touched the stone wall. "I know," she smiled. "Of course you do." Together, they opened the door a little wider for the next person coming up the path. Cold air moved out slowly, steady, and patient. For most of his life, Amos had thought the promise was to keep the Icehouse locked. Now he understood it had always been to keep it ready. The spring kept running beneath Blue Hollow. The names were no longer hidden, and when the cool air touched his face, Amos did not hear a secret anymore. He heard Lila's voice, clear as water under stone. Not yet had finally become now.